The Honourable Member for Livingston-McLeod.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I don't have as well prepared a presentation as the member from Old Didsbury Three Hills, but I just basically like to touch on a few points, if I could, with relation to this topic. It's one that our party and a lot of our members have been working with for many years. First of all, I'd like to thank the member from Wetaskiwin-Camrose for bringing this forward. We did have a quick little conference the other day just to talk about things in general, and I realized that the wording of the motion was a little bit perhaps misleading in that it was perhaps a little bit vague, and we talked a little bit about trying to understand where he was coming from, and today he provided great clarification, I think, and suggested many of the things that I suspected were in the motion, but it basically says that be it resolved that the Legislative Assembly urges the government to conduct a review of existing legislation related to surface rights and work to ensure landowners' rights to fair compensation and due process are respected. So to me, I think that that leaves one to imagine that that writer of that motion, which the member obviously was also thinking about some of the things that were mentioned in the presentation he made, and also by the presentations that were made by Calgary Elbow and also by our member from Old Didsbury Three Hills. So I'd like to touch on a few of those if I could. I'm going to be talking a little bit about the previous opinions that have been made over the past few years here in this House regarding some of these bills. I'd like to talk a little bit about, first of all, surface rights, which have been mentioned here initially in the motion and talked about already so well. I'd like to also talk, too, on, as others did, Bill 36, better known as ELSA, which is the Alberta Land Stewardship Act, and also touch on Bill 2, the Responsible Energy Act, where there are some issues there that we dealt with a couple of years ago that are still a problem today. And as well, I think someone mentioned in the House Bill 24, which has to do with the pore spaces underneath our properties and how the government launched and passed a bill that suddenly took that property away from us. And lastly, I'd like to talk a little bit about what we think is a great initiative at the end, and that would be to pass a Alberta Property Rights Preservation Bill, so that from here going forward, property owners could have some guarantee that their property rights are protected. So let's talk a little bit about property rights in general. We've talked about how property rights are basically the foundation of landowners' financial security and prosperity. But landowners need to know their investment in their land and their livelihood is protected, and there is some sort of sustainable and predictable way of doing business, therefore. And they cannot afford, nor would anyone want to, be involved in a situation where their land could be devalued or their operations could be put into question by others, including government. And if that is the case, and if government is going to come in, there should and have to be proper compensation. Yet the former PC government passed several bills related to surface rights and property rights in general that have compromised that very thing, the property rights of people, the landowners' rights to proper notification, to fair compensation, to appeals, and finally to appeal to the court if necessary. These things are fundamental in today's society, yet the previous government took all of that away with the passage of these bills. So we have called for a review of property and surface rights legislation before, since our inception, both prior to us being elected in 2012 and throughout the period from 2009 to 2011, when some of these bad bills were put through. So we believe that this motion is a fairly good place to start. And we're so happy and recognize that the government in power today has made on numerous occasions many statements regarding these bad bills, and I referred to this in question period today, and I think we used the word draconian in those words that I talked about today, and also where some of the members over there that were here in that time, including the government House leader, referred to some of these bills as bad legislation and stupid legislation. So I think this is a great idea to go back in and start looking at this now and look at how we can protect landowners' rights to all of these things and ensure that compensation and an appeal process is there for them if and when necessary. So let's just talk a little bit about, first of all, then, property rights and surface rights. And I think it's important for people to understand surface rights have a lot to do with the right of a oil and gas exploration and development company to go in and get access to land for the purpose of developing their resources. But at the same time, we also have to involve property rights for the landowners. And most of all, and most important, we have to guarantee that the landowners' rights, when these kinds of disturbances occur, are protected. Compensation is paid to them for the lease of that land, whether it's owned or it is leased themselves as part of their major operation. And we have to ensure that reclamation and all the environmental concerns are properly looked after. But the Surface Rights Act now has a problem. Section 36 of that act, which is regarding compensation, has a bit of a loophole. And we need to look at that very carefully, and we need to ensure that despite the fact that when a company goes bankrupt, there is some way that these landowners are properly compensated and they continue to receive their fees and their lease payments no matter what happens. And right now that is not guaranteed in that act. So I would urge the government, if they're going to do this review, to look into that matter specifically. I'd also like to mention now, too, with respect to the Bill 36 that was mentioned up earlier before, which is the Alberta Land Stewardship Act. There's actually several sections of that act that we believe need strong attention as soon as possible. And I'll mention a few of these today, and I hope some of you or one of you is taking some notes on this, because this is important. Section 11, particularly in the Alberta Land Stewardship Act, talks about the regional plans where they can rescind existing rights, including development rights, resource extraction rights, mining rights, water licenses, grazing leases, and dispositions and approvals and permits. We need to get that thing out of there. It's a bad section. Similarly, Section 19, that talks about restricted right to compensation regarding water license, grazing leases, and so on are amended or rescinded again. We need to get that out of there. Section 13, no right to the courts unless the cabinet allows it. That's just an insult to democracy. Section 15, that it is binding on all municipalities and all Albertans without question. Section 15.3, no right to make claims against the government. Section 15.4, the role and authority of courts is restricted by this Act. And Section 17, that this Act trumps all other acts. Truly, these sections need to be reviewed. They need to be repealed. I urge the government of today, who has spoken against this bill before, carry on, do what they have promised to do, and now that they're in power, to please look at this in the most urgent manner and effect the changes that are necessary in Bill 36, like I've just outlined. So that concludes 36. I'd like to move quickly, and I don't know how my time's going, Mr. Speaker.
You have about 1 minute.
Pardon?
About 1 minute.
Okay. Let's just get into Bill 2 then very quickly then, because I realize I've taken longer than anticipated. Bill 2, the Responsible Energy Act, stripped landowners of the right to independent arbitration and fair compensation. We need to put back into place what we had before at the ERCB, before they created the energy regulator. We need to put back the landowner rights, which under statute law, so they could appeal the decision to the Court of Appeal, to the highest court. We need to get that back, please. It's extremely important. Bill 24. Bill 24 is when the government came along and said, we need a place to pump carbon, so we think that we should just take all the land underneath all of your properties and give it back to the Crown, and then we have the right to come onto your land and pump this stuff down below your home or your barn or your fields and any other properties you may have. This is a draconian act. This one, too, just like Bill 19 that was rescinded before, it must be thrown out as well. And lastly, the Property Rights Initiative bill, I think that we would like to suggest to the government that it bring forward a property rights preservation bill. We'll work to assist with you on that. We want to ensure that there's no private property being taken from a resident of Alberta by government without fair compensation.